Hello and welcome to episode 102 of the Ego Chall Podcast. My name is Preston Byers, and as always, I'm joined by my co-host, Justin Binkowski. And on today's episode, we finally have some information about the Call of Duty Challengers circuit in 2024, and we'll get into all of that shortly. And we also have matches in the Call of Duty League after nearly a month away. We are finally back watching CDL matches and covering them and giving more predictions at the end of this show. But before we do any of that, how are you doing, Bink?
I'm doing all right. Pretty bittersweet night tonight with the Steelers season coming to an end, but at the same time, at least the Eagles didn't win. So I guess I'll take that trade off there. But yeah, other than that, it was a pretty action-packed weekend of COD, and we got some stuff to talk about.
Yeah, I wouldn't know the feeling about having a very excruciating loss this weekend in the playoffs. Definitely not. Definitely didn't go to Buffalo Wild Wings and watch my beloved Cleveland Browns get embarrassed by a rookie quarterback. So I wouldn't know that feeling. So we're just going to get right into COD right now. The first order of business, challengers. Finally, some kind of announcement, some kind of acknowledgement that this actually kind of exists in the universe. This week, or I believe it was today, which was this 15th. We're doing this in the early morning of January 16th, but on the 15th, the Call of Duty League announced that a challenger circuit is actually happening, and that there will be tournaments this season, online cups, and at least two challengers open events. So 11 cups, 2 opens, one at the Boston Breach Major, which is the first major of the season, and then the third at the Toronto Ultra Major, which is the third major of the season. The Miami Heretics co-founder and co-owner, he said that, I don't have his name off the top of my head, but he said that they are also working on a challengers event as well. His name, Arnau Vidal. He is the founder and co-owner of Heretics, and he said in a response to Jacob Hale, said, "This is not correct. We are working on a challengers tournament as well." So we could potentially have 3 challengers open events, which is better than 2. And I think I got the date wrong on when this stuff was announced, but my brain has been fried and just kind of all over the place. But still, we have 11 cups, 2 opens, 3 elite seasons, and then the season will finish with the challengers finals, which will invite 16 teams to the Call of Duty World Championship for the challengers circuit. So that should be a fun event as well. Your thoughts on this, because that was actually one of the topics that we discussed last week on the show, that there had been no acknowledgement or no public announcement about what was happening with challengers and how it had basically left all of these amateur players in a sort of limbo. So now that it has finally been announced there is an actual format, what are your thoughts on this?
Yeah, I think two open tournaments is probably a little disappointing for a lot of people in the community. If Miami is able to host it and it's 3, I think that's a little more acceptable because then it's essentially just one less tournament than the CDL, which I don't think that's the end of the world. Obviously, it's not like they're going to open at each CDL event too, but only having one less is just better than having 2 less. So, the other main takeaway or talking point we had last week was how seeding and stuff would work for this first event coming up in a couple weeks. And the CDL announced that it'll be seeded by a combination of the 2024 Cup 1 points, which the first cup of the Challenger season is taking place this weekend, January 20th and 21st. So it'll be those points plus 10% of each player's 2023 Challenger points. So kind of what 10%, I mean, I don't know like the top players totals or anything off the top of my head. But I did mention last episode that the way the challenger scene works and operates without a lot of teams having contracts and stuff could lead to roster changes, especially If there's some situations where if a set of 3 guys makes a last minute roster change to get somebody with more pro points and that pushes them into a better bracket spot or something like that for the tournament. Some situations like that might arise, especially if we're factoring in points from last season. But then you have situations where, one team that we've talked a lot about with the squad of Bance, Hixie, Nasty, and Beans, I believe. All those guys were in the pro league last year, not challengers. So how many points do they get? Because they don't technically have challengers points, but they should have some quote unquote points for being in CDL. I don't know how that would work, but yeah, definitely. What we essentially were discussing last episode was just because of how late this announcement is, the seating could be a little funky for this first open. And, if there is only 2 opens this year, it's definitely less than ideal to have essentially half of the regular season affected um, by a late announcement not allowing for proper time to set up a qualification and seeding process. Sure, there will be the other cups and elite seasons and other than that, but it's literally would essentially be a third of the LAN opportunities if Heretics don't actually host an open. So yeah, we'll have to see how it all shakes out. We don't talk too much about challengers on this pod, but maybe we'll have a little more to talk about now. With the first cup coming up this weekend, and like I said, maybe some last minute roster moves for teams trying to get better positioning and seeding for the first open of the year on the challenger side of things. But yeah, overall, I think it was just a long time coming for people waiting for any tidbit of information. While it seemed like there was sentiment around people being disappointed in a lot of the announcements, I mean, at the end of the day, this is better than nothing. There was definitely a possibility where, with game battles shutting down and stuff like that, like they could have just easily said, yeah, the challenge is done. We're not even going to worry about it. And we're just going to focus on the CDL. So, although it's not what people might have been hoping for, or not as beneficial or as wide in scope or as many tournaments, however you want to phrase it. Some people might have been disappointed, but at the end of the day, there's at least some form of a challenger season, which is better than nothing.
Yeah, of course. I fully agree with that. The other bit of news was that Face It will be the host of the Challengers circuit. Obviously, with Game Battles dying, Face It is stepping in, but Face It, their anti-cheat will not be used. It's more just kind of a logistics thing. I'm sure they don't have any integration into Call of Duty or any of that kind of stuff. So their anti-cheat is not going to be used at all. It'll just be all... what is it called? Ricochet. So any COD anti-cheat, that will be the extent of it as far as challengers goes, which I'm sure people will be disappointed by, but likely not surprised by. So Face It running challengers this season, and then we'll see how things go. We don't know what the future of the CDL is, or future of the challenger scene definitely is after this season, but that is something to keep an eye on as we progress through the year, to see if any challengers players have issues with the Face It program or the platform moving forward, which will be I'm sure a lot of complaints. One thing, it wasn't in our notes, but I just remember seeing it, was JCap's series of tweets. I don't know if you saw this, but he was kind of having a back and forth with other members of the community about the validity of challengers as a profession, so to speak. His first tweet was, "I would love to have open events back, but people need to be realistic when it comes to challengers. It's meant to be path to pro, not a long-term living. The NBA G League has an average salary of $40,000. What do people expect when hosting an event is a guaranteed loss of money?" He had a bunch of other jobs, or a bunch of other tweets about exactly, like, the idea that there are people in challengers that necessarily are expecting more. They expect more stability. They expect more lands and events and all of that. I don't know if you saw that or if you had any thoughts on that, because I thought it was interesting. Obviously, JCap, a multiple time world champion, one of the best Call of Duty players of all time, and also a head coach for a CDL team with some former Challengers players on his team. So I was wondering if you had any kind of opinion on his opinions.
The one that I saw, um,
Is
I'm
he?
looking for it now.
He had this Harden, this Tom Brady
I saw
quote.
that one. Yeah.
Yeah, he said Brady went to Harden's office and whined. So this was a story. And Brady said, "I'm never going to get my chance. They're only giving me 2 reps." Harden simply replied, "Just go out there and focus on doing the best you can with those 2 reps. Make them as perfect as you possibly can." And JCap said, "Replace reps with lands. And this is my message to Challengers players."
The one I saw too was I don't know who but somebody posted to the initial one you read with the G League average salary, and it's at Tricks Plays on Twitter goes, "These things are always easy to say from people that never dealt with challengers. Nobody's expecting a living wage for challengers. Have fun picking new talent from the dying challenger scene next year." And JCap, I thought this was, important to note, especially for people who might not even know JCap's history or how long it is, but he just says, "I played in the area of COD until 2015 when there were no salaries. Prize money was the only income, and I saw plenty of people who didn't win and had to quit. I just happened to win enough to make it into a career, but yeah, I can't imagine what Challengers is like." I thought that was an important perspective to add to it. Like, yeah, sure, JCap never competed in Challengers, but I mean, he definitely competed in that era a long time ago where, there's the famous ring house video we've mentioned of Killer, like, look at my bank account for miracles
Yeah.
and all that stuff, where literally the only chance they had to make money was winning these tournaments, and that was it. So I definitely, I like JCap as a player. I think he's a good coach too. And I definitely respect his opinions and his mindset when it comes to what is and isn't important for, Call of Duty esports and any of that stuff. But yeah, I mean, it's definitely just a situation where, especially if, operating these tournaments is coming at a known loss, like you do have to be realistic at some standpoint. And I think I did see, now that you're mentioning it, like Adam Apicella bringing up something too about like it being much more expensive now with the switch to PC, as opposed to in the past when you had like the console partnerships with like Sony and stuff. Like, it was much cheaper to have PS4s at that time. um and so that could play a factor in it, maybe. Moving forward with the Microsoft acquisition of Activision being finalized, maybe something down the road could be finalized where Challengers at least is moving back to uh
Xbox.
console. And yeah, with Microsoft could go to Xbox, and that could maybe be cheaper and help lead to more events. um but yeah, I mean, at the end of the day, that's really my head space on challengers. Is I definitely think it's important. We've talked at length on this podcast in the past about how much I know. I'm pretty sure you agreed with me when I said it, but long time ago, talking about all of the teams needing to have a challengers team, so it's essentially like a minor league affiliate,
Yeah.
similar to what baseball and stuff like that. Um, but it just seems with the current state of not only Call of Duty esports, but esports as a whole, that that's kind of a pipe dream at this point. And now just whatever we're able to get out of challengers, uh, kind of got to roll with the punches and do what you can. Like, not to, for lack of a better term, like, you get these 2 opportunities on land, you don't want to mess it up, especially if that's really the only opportunities you're going to have to showcase your talent and potentially be graded on that for having an opportunity to join the CDL the following season. Like, that just intensifies the importance of those events. And obviously, with this first event coming up and the seeding situation and all that we've already talked about, definitely not ideal conditions for challengers,
Nope.
especially if they're having these limited opportunities. And one of those opportunities is potentially, having less than ideal circumstances for qualifications, yada yada. I feel like a broken record at this point, but Yeah, I mean, it's doesn't seem like a secret that people aren't happy with the Challengers announcement. I mean, people aren't really happy in the Call of Duty community all the time, anyways. But in this case, it's definitely some disappointment around this. But I do feel like what was announced is better than nothing. Which, if there was some announcement that said like we will not have a Challengers season for 2024. And I wouldn't have been surprised if that happened at this point with just the lack of information we had up until this point. So anything is better than that possibility. Is it the best system and most ideal circumstances for these up and coming talents? No. But again, better than nothing in my eyes.
Yeah, definitely better than nothing. Definitely just having something, and if it is 2 or 3 open events and nearly a dozen cups, and then obviously challengers finals at the end of the year, that is something. It's not a big step down from what they've had the last year or two anyway. So it's not like we really are missing a bunch from the standard that has been set with this CDL era of challengers. I won't belabor the point because I think we do need to move on shortly, but I do just want to say, like, whatever we can do as a community to make challengers more accessible and cheaper for the organizers and the players and the organizations that might be sponsoring or fielding teams at these challengers events. That's what we need to do. So if that is having Xbox, almost like sponsor an event, essentially, where there's 180 Xboxes in the pit, and that's something that we can have instead of 180 PCs, which is, I'm sure, a lot more expensive. And also just like, I don't know, you'd have to go through like a third party, whereas if you're with Microsoft, you can just kind of do it through Xbox and just call it a day. And it's a lot easier to replace an Xbox than it is a PC, at least in my experience. But I think there's such a use for challengers. I don't know what the exact percentage of the league is, but it's a considerable portion of the league is made up of ex-challengers players, whether they were pros and then they went to challengers and they're back into the CDL, or they had never debuted for the CWL or the CDL and they started in challengers and have kind of worked their way up to a CDL roster. It's a not an insignificant percentage of the CDL player base, which I think is just a testament to the idea that we do need challengers or some kind of path to pro. Last point I'll make is I actually think that the CDL and esports is in general, not just Call of Duty, but every esports scene would actually benefit much more from integrating itself with collegiate athletics, because that actually gives players a backup plan. What JCap was saying was, this is not a full-time job, and I do agree with that. I don't know how some of these players keep doing it where year after year they're grinding away and they are likely never going to be a CDL pro or never going to make a significant amount of money to kind of recoup the losses that they have essentially endured just by trying to grind through challengers all these years. The best way, in my opinion, to kind of offset that is to have college athletics be a part of Call of Duty esports. What we had with the College COD League, where guys would literally go to these schools, enroll in the programs, and then they would also play on the college, their Call of Duty team. I think that's something that would work really well. Of course, that gets abused, as we see in traditional sports, where guys transfer 4 or 5 times in their careers, and they're just hopping to the next best team. But the vast majority of players don't do that. If you look at a college football roster, a lot of the guys are probably not transferring at all. They're just there playing football or playing basketball, and then they're just going to graduate and go on with their lives. They just want to play that sport until they can't, and then get a degree while they're at it. And I think that would be the best course of action for Call of Duty and esports as a whole, just because it's not an athletics thing. Like, I don't know if you call this, sports or athletics. I don't really care about any of that stuff, but the competition aspect of it, and you can go to school and get a degree and just kind of continue on with your prospective professional career while also not completely abandoning whatever kind of education you might be able to get. I think that would be the best case scenario for everybody, and it would be the best backup plan. And the CDL and Activision, they wouldn't really have to deal very much with that. It would be more on the NCAA, which is its own can of worms, or whoever wants to oversee that. I know there's been a lot of collegiate League of Legends players that have kind of worked their way up through like the LCS or the lower level of the developmental leagues and stuff in League of Legends. So maybe that is something that could happen down the line, but that's probably asking a lot and probably not going to happen at least anytime soon. Any other thoughts before we move in and actually get into the matches from the last week?
Yeah, let's get into it.
All right, so we're just going to kind of breeze through some of these because we didn't actually have a ton of upsets or huge surprises. We did have a few, but the first day was Friday, January 12th. We had 3 matches. First series, pretty straightforward, at least in terms of the final result. 3-0 Atlanta FaZe over LAG, something we both expected. What stood out to you in this match?
Yeah, it's kind of similar to some of the matches we saw earlier in the season where it was a 3-0 series count, but some of the individual maps were close. This one in particular, the hard point was a 20-point score, 250 to 230, and the control was 3-2. We've seen a lot of 3-2 controls, especially on Invasion, where it's just 5 defensive round wins. LAG was almost able to win an offense in the round 5 on control, but they just weren't able to quite, punch it across the finish line there. So Atlanta gets the 3-0 sweep, but, it definitely was probably closer in some of the individual maps than some people might have expected just based on the names and the franchises. The big one to me, Brian Stats 1 on Twitter tweeted after this one, that Stamp and Abizi won their 100th career league match in this one. They have a record of 127 as a duo in league matches since Black Ops 4. That just seems absolutely absurd to me. Now, it does, I think, because there are like more league matches and maybe like it's counting some of the online home series from MW 2019. I'm not sure exactly what it's counting about, but according to Brian Stats on Twitter, that is apparently their record in league matches, and that just seemed absurd to me.
Yeah, I mean, they're the greatest duo in terms of longevity that we've seen because most teams or most players did not stick with their team or together for multiple years, and this is 4 or 5 years in a row where they have not been away from each other. Since Simp has been a pro, he has been Abizi's teammate, which is an incredible stat. And obviously, if you're, I believe they've gotten the number 1 seed at Champs every single year of the CDL so far. So that adds up relatively quickly in terms of wins, and especially a very impressive win-loss record for FaZe and for these guys in particular. But yeah, I didn't have any other thoughts on that match. Of course, the end result is something we expected, maybe not how we got there, but a 3-0 for Atlanta FaZe nonetheless. Next up, Seattle versus Toronto. I was interested in seeing this match simply because it kind of would give me a good gauge because Toronto had lost their last match before the break to the Boston Breach, I believe. Maybe I think it was Boston. But they lost that last match, and Seattle had a very good first week and then not so great second week. Kind of seeing where these two teams match up turned into a 3-0 for the Toronto Ultra, which I actually wasn't expecting. I figured Seattle would take a map or something, but it was a nearly 100-point hardpoint win, a 6-0 on search, which is by far the most surprising result of this series, and then another 3-2 invasion control, like you just said. Did that 6-0 search, Karachi search, Abuza dropped 0 on it, and Kleenex and Insight both go 8-1. Did that surprise you as much as it surprised me?
I mean, you got a team with Illy on it. You don't really expect them to get 6-0 too often, but could have just been a situation here where, kind of like you were saying, Toronto was out for blood and trying to fix some mistakes that potentially happened in that Boston series before the break and all that. So, yeah, I mean, I guess anytime you see a team that you think on paper has some strong S&D players, which you consider that with Seattle, a 6-0 is going to stand out. But yeah, at the end of the day, it happens, and Toronto was able to capitalize there.
I'm not sure if this has anything to do with it, but I don't know if you've been seeing all of the GA stuff about how the punishment is no practice or no warm-ups. And Seattle was kind of involved in that, if I'm not mistaken, with Abuza and potentially bringing breaking the single tap GA. So I don't know if that came into effect here, if they weren't able to warm up against other CDL teams or able to practice. But if it is, then it would be a punishment, it seems, because they started out really slow, and then they did have a pretty competitive third map, but those first two maps were not very close at all. Next, the final match of Friday, Minnesota versus New York. I mean, neither one of us expected the defending world champions to lose to the winless Minnesota Rocker at this point, but that first map, 250 to 188, Minnesota wins terminal hardpoint. And then, I mean, even if you're in New York and you're like, well, we're the defending world champions, we're still one of the best teams in the world, if not the best. I feel like you just got to sweat a little bit, be like, all right, let's pick it up, guys. I can't be losing by 62 points to the Rocker on hardpoint. But they locked it in right after that. One search, a sweep on control, high-rise control, and then a 47-point win on invasion hardpoint to close out the series. Were you, kind of what are your thoughts on that? Because Minnesota, I wouldn't take them as a huge hardpoint team, but to come out and beat New York map 1 is a pretty big surprise.
Yeah, at the same time, I'm scrolling really quick through the results that I have typed up, and I don't think the New York did play terminal hardpoint against OpTic, and OpTic won that.
Mm-hmm.
But I'm not seeing terminal in any of their other matches, so there is a world where the vetoes worked out to Minnesota having the map 1 pick there and it being terminal somehow. Maybe New York picked being Team B or something like that. Just speculation. I don't know. But there is a world where that worked out, and that was somehow Minnesota's map pick, and then they're not really sweating it if maybe that's just not their pick, and then they're able to win after that. I guess just playing devil's advocate, but not taking anything away from Minnesota, especially the way things were working out for them before this. Taking a map there was definitely surprising, and kind of was eye-opening to me. And then after that, New York turned up and was able to take care of business. But especially if you look at the 3 matches for this day, LAG, Atlanta, Seattle, Toronto, and Minnesota, New York. If you were to tell me one of those was going to be a 3-0, I probably would have said the New York, Minnesota was most likely, especially the way LAG played against some of their other opponents early on. Probably, if they took a map against FaZe, I wouldn't have been super surprised. And Seattle, Toronto, kind of like you said, probably expecting Toronto to win, but maybe Seattle takes a map. So, credit to Minnesota for at least getting one on the board there.
Yeah, and to your point with terminal hardpoint, and specifically, so far New York is 6-3 in hardpoint. 2 of those losses are on terminal, the other on sub base. So they haven't lost a map on invasion, Karachi, or Skid Row. And then when you look at Minnesota, they are 4-5 in hardpoint, and they're 2-0 on terminal. So half of their hardpoint map wins are on that map. Of course, super small sample size, but at least the early returns do say that terminal might be one of Minnesota's stronger hardpoint maps and one of New York's weaker hardpoint maps. But even these teams, unless they're just not practicing certain maps at all, which is a strategy to not waste time and just know that you're going to auto veto something. But if that's not the case, these teams have to figure out what they're good at. And for New York, this is kind of a low risk proposition because Minnesota is not a good team. They can kind of see what they have on terminal or other maps and kind of test it out. It's something Atlanta FaZe has done in the years past where, especially later in the season, they will just try out maps that they don't stereotypically play or are not very good at. And they just kind of want to get a feel for how they will be on that map, especially later in the season when you do have to kind of broaden that map pool and be ready for some of the better teams that might expand their own map pool. So maybe that was some kind of calculus in there, but New York wins 3-1 regardless. That moves us into Saturday, January 13th, where we had 4 matches, a few entertaining ones, the first and last going to a Game 5. First match, Seattle versus Miami. We both picked, I picked Seattle, you picked Miami, so you jinxed them, not me, because the Seattle Surge come out on top, winning this 3-2. They win the opening 2 maps, and then they lose a 3-2 invasion control, another 3-2 invasion control, and then get obliterated on Skid Row hardpoint, nearly 100-point clubbed, but they rebound for a 6-4 Skid Row search and destroy victory. So a little bit of ice there from Seattle with Illy dropping 11, Abuza going for 10. Your thoughts on this series, because it looked like it was going to be a Seattle sweep potentially, and then 2 very strong respawns from the Heretics force a Game 5 that they're not able to close out on.
Yeah, I mean, I think this kind of, I wasn't really thinking about it until you mentioned it, but it could raise some validity to potentially, GA stuff happening previously and potentially Seattle not being warmed up. But then, for this match, maybe they were a little bit more prepared and, able to get off to a strong start. Hook and Abuza really did shine in the first 2 maps in particular. An uncharacteristic round 5 offensive win for Miami on invasion control is what kind of started the hopes of a reverse sweep, and then map 4 was very dominant out of them. But kind of like we were talking about earlier, and this kind of also raises some points we mentioned with the 6-0 against Toronto is, Seattle is able to win 2 S&Ds here. You expect a team with Illy, like I said earlier, to be strong in S&D. So they're able to shut down the reverse sweep and get a win against a team that we kind of said heading into this one, both these guys were in that like 5th, 6th range in our own, tier list power rankings area. So this, especially with Miami being undefeated heading into this match, is a big win for Seattle.
Was it last year that Seattle was a good S&D team but not much else? Or was it the opposite? Because it's happening again.
It was Vanguard when Accuracy had all the Iceman clutches.
Yeah, I seem to remember maybe they were just really bad in control or something. Last year they I can't remember exactly what it was, but essentially this season they are looking like a below average respawn team again with a very good search and destroy gameplay, because right now they are 4-7 in hardpoint, 2-4 in control, but they are 5-2 in search. So that, obviously our favorite motto is S&D wins championships. So maybe they're able to squeak out a respawn here and there, and if they win both searches, it's not an issue. Obviously, that did not work out in their favor with Toronto having lost that search and losing both respawns and losing search in such a convincing way. But it's interesting just to see the disparity between respawn and search for any team, really, because we talked about it with Vegas last year. I think Atlanta FaZe was also very good in S&D, but not as great in respawn, which I'm pretty sure was flipped from the year before, where they were a very good respawn team, but they couldn't quite figure it out in search. And the Heretics on the other side are pretty average across hardpoint and S&D, but they're 4-1 in control. Like you said, 3-2. They win offense in round 5. I mean, I always love the control teams, the teams that are very dominant in that game mode. It remains to be seen if Miami is going to actually be that team. But I just love that the least important least important game mode of a series. Some teams are just, they're dead on that. They will win almost every single one. I think OpTic was like that last year, where they had like a 20-5 control record. It does help, but it's just interesting to see all of these teams figure something out there. But yeah, 3-2 Seattle, a big win to finish out their week, considering they had a pretty disappointing result against Toronto. Boston LAG up next. You picked Boston. I went with the Gorillas. I did not feel good about this pick because these two teams are kind of all over the place early in the season. At least they were before the break. But it turns out LAG might actually be good a little bit. They win 3-1, a very close opening hard point. Boston wins the search, and then a pretty convincing rest of the way for the Gorillas, a 120-point victory to close it out in hard point. I mean, how much do you think that this actually is something for LAG? Because we're not really sure what to make of the breach, so to speak, because they did beat Toronto, but they haven't really had much success otherwise. So what do you make of LAG's win over Boston?
This is a little more confusing after the last match of the week that we'll get to eventually, but no, I mean, my gut was telling me to go with LAG for this one anyway. I kind of just went with Boston because we were both uncertain about it, and I wanted to, have spice up the pick'ems a little bit. Didn't really work out in my favor, but I think outside of Boston's win against Toronto, LAG wasn't getting the wins, but were looking competitive and more competitive in individual maps than people definitely expected. I mean, there was a lot of trash talk about the roster construction and the coaching staff and everything with LAG. So they've definitely surpassed the very, very low expectations that the community seemingly set for LAG as a squad heading into the season. But yeah, I mean, this is just, you face teams that are put in front of you, and LAG was able to get a win here that kind of was an important one, especially based on some of the tougher opponents they've faced off against and haven't been able to quite, get the end result despite having some map wins here and there. Getting a series win here against anybody is important to try and avoid starting in the loser's bracket at Major 1.
Next match, we had Toronto versus LAT. Both of us went with Toronto. Turned out to be a pretty good pick. 3-1 win for the Ultra. Only map win that the Thieves got was a round 11 invasion search and destroy win in map 2. Map 3, Envoy drops 39. Scrap goes for 34 in a 3-2 invasion control. And then they close it out big time. Yeah, it's a thing. But they close it out Karaji hardpoint. Scrap goes 29-15 to close it out. So a big 2-0 week for Toronto. LAT will get to their second match, but this was, I believe, their fourth loss, dropping to 1-4. Anything stand out to you in this series on either side?
I mean, it's definitely a little interesting to see Toronto have that dominant 6-0 in search against a team like Seattle and then lose a 6-5 here to LAT. It was a very nice play out of Ghosty, where he kind of got a two-piece through a smoke after Toronto got first blood in the round 11. And I forget, they asked Scrappy after the game in the post-match interview about that two-piece situation, what happened. It might have been a little bit of a one-way, or it might not have been. Something funky with the smoke would have kept Scrappy from getting line of sight on him. But whatever the case may be, Ghosty was able to capitalize there and get a two-piece that turned the round from a 3v4 in Toronto's favor to a 3v2 in LAT's favor, and then they were able to trade out after that and secure the dub. But yeah, I mean, outside of that, Toronto played well. Was looking ahead. They got a big match this coming up week that we'll get into eventually. But outside of the Boston hiccup for them, um, Toronto's looked pretty solid in my eyes.
This is just a weird stat. I don't really know how much it means or if it means anything, but in Search and Destroy, Scrap has a .66 KD, but he has almost the exact same damage that Kleenex does, and Kleenex leads the team in damage per round. So I mean it. He's pretty much 500 in First Bloods. Scrappy is 7-6. So he's getting in a lot of gunfights. So is Kleenex. I'm at 8-8, but I just thought that was interesting to have such a disparity between the KD and the damage that's being dealt. But yep, Toronto going 2-0 this week. I think you hit the nail on the head that it is interesting to see how they beat Seattle in Search and then to lose the LAT. I believe they're 2-3 in Search this season, so something to keep an eye on as we move further into the year. Last match on Saturday was probably the best match of the weekend, or at least the one that a lot of people had their eyes on. OpTic Texas versus Las Vegas Legion. Of course, heading in, neither one of these teams, they're kind of, they're seen in different directions or seen in different areas of the league. OpTic is always expected to be a championship contender. Not so much for the Vegas Legion, but that was not the case, at least in the first two maps of this series. A nearly 120-point victory in hardpoint for the Legion to start off the series, then 6-3 on Terminal Search. At this point, Legion fans getting a little hyped up, maybe a sweep of OpTic, but that was not the case here. A reverse sweep for OpTic as they get a 3-0 high-rise control win. They get a 54-point win on Terminal Hardpoint, and then a 6-1 dominant S&D win on Invasion. So a big bounce back from that Terminal Search loss earlier in the series. So OpTic wins this 3-2. They pick up a much-needed win. More so, they avoid a big loss that it would have been had they lost this series. Your thoughts on this? Obviously, Vegas may be winning champs. I don't know if that's dead. It feels dead. I feel like it feels like a Clayster Vegas thing, not a Purge attached thing. So is Vegas winning champs, or are we moving on?
Maybe with the Paris is winning champs thing with Kismet. Technically, Kismet did win champs, so
maybe we're on to something.
Maybe, but no, in all seriousness, this was one. You definitely expect OpTic to win. So the first couple maps going Vegas's way is definitely, an eye opener, especially for the green wall, as we've talked about. They expect perfection, they expect to win. So it's probably a little concerning, but definitely a positive sign to see, OpTic able to regain, bounce back, and secure the reverse sweep. Another interesting stat from Brian Stats One on Twitter again. He said before this match, tonight will be Attach's 70th career match against OpTic. He's 26 and 43 against them. I thought that was a little off. I didn't, look into it at all, but I know, especially at the start of Attach's career, like during AW when FaZe and OpTic were having a lot of those back and forth grand finals appearances, that might be where a lot of those wins come from. But 43 losses definitely feels like a lot to me, but he's been playing a while, so I guess it makes sense. But the second half of this year was, interestingly enough, he has beat OpTic in their first matchup of the year in all 4 years of the CDL. And I think everyone was kind of like, oh yeah, wow, that's cool, but there's no shot he makes it 5 years, right? And then Vegas wins map 1, and people are like, oh, maybe. And map 2, it's like, oh shit, this might be happening, but it doesn't. So,
yeah.
Another interesting stat. Shout out to Brian Stats there for that. But, yeah, just one I think could have got a little scary there for the green wall, but they were able to clutch up and get the dub.
You've been citing a lot of Brian Stats. Is he an assistant Ego Chall correspondent now? What's going on?
No, I just saw him on Twitter, and I think Breaking Point may retweet him, or I think the attached one was actually on the broadcast, so I saw it. So.
We need like Vegas is winning champs updates, just like the weirdest, most obscure stats about the Legion. Like Vegas wins like 94% of their matches when they play at 3 o'clock Eastern or something. We need this, Brian Stats. We need something to keep the hope for Vegas, because we're about to crush all of the hope that they have in this next match. They played Atlanta to kick off the Sunday matches. I believe Temp tweeted it was weird that Vegas ended the day on Saturday and then played the first match on Sunday, which got JCat fired up again a little bit on Twitter, saying like NBA players, they do back-to-backs each night, even though they always complain about it. So I don't know why COD players are any different. But Vegas, Atlanta, kickoff on Sunday, and Atlanta wins 3-0. There was no stream. There was a power outage, so no stream. But still, Vegas.
Just for map 1.
Yeah, just for map 1. But Vegas, they lose 3-0. And they go 0-2 this week. They drop to 1-5, I believe, on the season. So not a great start for our beloved Legion. But Atlanta, they pick up another win and move to 5-0 on the season, which is, par for the course for Atlanta. They kind of do this on a regular basis. So a big difference between these two teams, even though the hard point was pretty close, only a 25-point difference, but Search and Control were, not that close. Any thoughts on this in Vegas? I don't know if they're going to be heading to a blow it up bowl soon, but it does feel like this roster is not clicking at all.
Oh yeah, I mean the big one there, you kind of mentioned it, but Atlanta being 5-0 and most importantly 15-3 in map count.
They're cooking.
The only maps they lost 2 in their opening series against Boston, which might lead more to this Boston. Who really knows what they're capable of? On some days they look really good, some days they don't. And the other map, so those 2 maps, it was map 3 and map 4 against Boston in the opening series. So it was a potential for a reverse sweep for Boston, but Atlanta iced up in the Search. And then the other one was against Seattle. I'm just scrolling up to find it again, and I lost it. But I think, if I remember correctly, it might have been a Search.
I gotta look it up real quick too.
It was High Rise Search 6-4. I think that was a game Draza went 2-7 or something like that, if I remember correctly. That was on December 16th, though, so literally a month ago. So yeah, those are 3 maps Atlanta has lost, which literally means their record in all 3 game modes is X-1.
Yeah.
Which is pretty good start to the season, I'd say.
Yeah, 6-1 in hardpoint, 5-1 in Search, and 4-1 in Control. So pretty balanced so far this season. I'm just looking at their stats on Breaking Point. I mean, it's ridiculous to look at their stats. Overall, they all have above a 1.13 KD, except Abizi, who we know he's gonna do a lot. He's doing a lot on the map, and so he's got a 0.98, but also KD is not everything, and Abizi obviously has a pretty big effect on the team. And when you look at Search, Draza is the guy that's lagging behind, which if they fix, honestly, he probably is playing a little poorly if he's 3-10 in First Bloods, but you're also 5-1. So who's to say at this point what really needs to be fixed and what does not? But yeah, FaZe moves to 5-0. Vegas drops to 1-5. The real blow it up bowl of Sunday was the Minnesota Rocker and the Carolina Royal Ravens. The idea that people say is the 2 worst NFL teams should play right before the Super Bowl to decide who gets the number 1 pick. This would be that game if the CDL had that. Both teams, when Minnesota entered this game or this match with an 0-4 record, Carolina came in at 1-3, and unfortunately they did have to field TJ Haley instead of Real, who we had talked about last week. He was potentially going to be out at least a week with visa issues. It seems like it's just a temporary thing, but they did have to sub in TJ, and of course this reunites TJ and Clay after their season with the Vegas Legion. We kind of, it was an interesting substitute, and it was a very, very close match, even though the the final result would not say that, but reality would say that. It was a 250 to 242 invasion hardpoint to open the series. Minnesota ends up winning. Accuracy drops 26. So that's pretty interesting to see the old man. He still got it in respawn. 6-2 for Minnesota in search, 10 kills from Linz, and then a 3-2 invasion control, which has become a gigantic trend in the CDL. 3-2 in favor of Minnesota. Vivid drops 35. Linz goes for 32. TJ, I think he was complaining that he couldn't overclock his controller, so he was having a little bit of trouble with that, but he still went for 33 in the control despite the loss. But yeah, both teams now sit at 1-4. Two of, if not the two worst teams in the CDL 5 matches in. Of course, that's not a great sample size, and we haven't even gotten to our first LAN event yet. But do you foresee any roster changes coming for any or either of these two teams as we kind of approach LAN 1 or after Major 1?
It's possible after Major 1. I don't think anything will happen, outside of continuing visa circumstances for Carolina. But, I in particular kind of was gassing GodRx and was very excited for him to be back in the league heading into this season, and he just hasn't performed up to par what I myself and probably many others were expecting. There is the caveat, though, that he did perform very well on LAN back in the MW 2019 season. Then the COVID stuff happened that led to the online switch, and that kind of hurt his performance. So maybe it's just a situation where he doesn't play as well online as he does on LAN. But barring some last minute change here, he'll have at least have a losers bracket opportunity to show what he's capable of on LAN again. So that'll be a very big match for him, assuming he's still in the roster. But I have been impressed with Gwyn's performance. He led the way in map 1 in this one, even though it was a losing effort. And he had that ace back in the round 11 against Vegas that was Carolina's 1 win. There's been other moments that I can't think off the top of my head, but I feel like he's played very well this year. And in a year that might be dominated by teams without a rookie, the rookie of the year could go to a player who doesn't actually end up winning an event. And I gotta say, especially before this last map of the match of the day on Sunday, I think Gwyn has got to be one of the front runners for Rookie of the Year at this point, despite Carolina's struggles as a squad.
Yeah, statistically, he is the best team on or the best player on the team. Nobody has over a 0.92 KD except him at 1.12. I'm having a really hard time speaking, but kills per 10 minutes. He leads the team. He's pretty close to Clay in damage. OBJ, he's second on the team. So he obviously is the best player pretty much in every single statistical category for Carolina at this point. But like you said, it's going to be hard for, I think, some people to vote him for Rookie of the Year if they are one of it, or certainly the worst team in the league. If they're not winning matches, then it's just how it is. That happens in traditional sports all the time too, where you could be a really good quarterback, but if your team is 4-13, you're probably not getting Rookie of the Year over a player that goes to the playoffs or something like that. So we'll see. Obviously, a lot of time left. Who knows if this roster will resemble what it is now at later points in the season. But yeah, he has had a really good start to this rookie year for him. Next match, New York versus LAT. Not a huge surprise in terms of results. The Subliners win 3-1. LAT dropped to 1-5 on the year, which is it's not good. I don't think. Would you hazard to say that that's not a good start to the season for the Thieves? I don't think they were expecting to go 1-5, even though Nate Shot and when we were talking about kind of the logistics or the financial aspect of LAT. It was, during the end of last season, Nate Shot said it was kind of like a rebuild, so to speak, how they were, getting rid of their championship players and bringing in younger ostensibly cheaper players to kind of replace them. But 1-5 is also a pretty bad record. And they haven't been super competitive in some of these matches, even though it wasn't a blowout in any of the respawns, but a 6-1 result on search. And just not a good start of the season. Is there anything that you can think of that the LAT needs to really fix immediately, or is this just kind of going against New York is a tough challenge? They went against Toronto also this week. That's a tough challenge. Do you kind of just chalk it up to, you play two of the best teams in the league and you're probably going to lose anyway?
I was just looking for this too. There was a situation on Twitter in this one where
the methods thing.
Methods, yeah, it was essentially saying there might be some stuff going on behind the scenes, and then JCap immediately shot that down. I feel like we've been talking about JCap a lot in this episode.
Another Ego Chall correspondent.
So yeah, there might be some stuff going on behind the scenes, even though JCap says there isn't. But yeah, tough opponents. One thing that definitely stands out in this match, in a week in particular, where we saw a lot of it 3-2 invasion controls. We see the Thieves take a 3-1 here, which means they won an offense at one point. I don't really remember the map, to be honest, but that's a little interesting. But yeah, I mean, they got a lot of talent on that Thieves roster. We've talked highly of Afro in the past, Cammy, former MVP candidate all the way back in Cold War. And we saw some positives out of Joe Deceives on a struggling LAG team last year, and we saw some strong positives out of Ghosty, kind of like, filling in for OpTic and doing a good job there in his debut. So the squad has potential, just seems like they're not able to put it together right now just yet. But historically, we have even seen the LAT roster that won champs, right? They most famously heading into Boston last year, they were struggling in the online qualifiers, and they made it all the way to the grand finals. So might be an org thing where they struggle in some online qualifiers, but they show up on LAN. Not making excuses or anything though. They just definitely probably not the result LAT fans are expecting, but we'll just have to see where they're able to go from here.
Yeah, the online stuff is weird because LAT is based in LA.
Yep.
Obviously, New York is based in Dallas. So like that may play a factor. Who knows? But yeah, I have no idea about any of that stuff. We just kind of have to base it on the result, and we mention it from time to time about especially if it's Atlanta versus LAT, that's a pretty big gap. But those kind of games can be a little bit weird. But still not a good result for LAT, even though this is probably their hardest week to go against the two champs finalists from a year ago. But still 1-5 to start the season. Last match of the week was Boston versus Miami, which was another one that I said I was interested in seeing because both these teams were kind of in the middle. I wasn't really sure what to make of Boston, and we both said that we wanted to see more of Miami, that they would have to win a few more of these matches to kind of get at least more respect in the sense of like respecting them as a potential championship contender if that were to be the case. Unfortunately, they lost both of the matches they had this week. Lost to Seattle in the first match, and then to close it out, they lose to the Boston Breach. But this was a very, very close series. They win the opening hardpoint and then lose round 11 Terminal Search to Boston. Snoopy goes for 12 medals, dropped 13 kills in that series, or in that map. And then a 3-2 high-rise control. Capsule goes for 32 in the breach, clutch up, and then a 250 to 181 invasion hardpoint where Snoopy goes for 31 kills, 1.82 KD for that map. So, just a very, very strong series from him in general, 1.26 KD across the series, and a game high 96 kills. Nobody else was even at 80 in this series. So big series out of him. I don't think he technically counts as a rookie of the year, but he is really a rookie because he only played one event last year.
Oh, he
So
does.
he does count as a rookie.
Oh yeah.
So he is probably looking at rookie of the year as the front runner. Obviously, they are not at a good point in terms of their record, but it's still better than Carolina at this point. So Snoopy, an incredible series, leads the Breach to victory. Your thoughts on this final match of the week?
Yeah, you kind of took everything I was gonna say. Definitely a pop-off performance by Snoopy here. Kind of a little worrying for Miami and the Vamos supporters.
Yeah,
We mentioned heading into this week, right, against two teams, kind of, especially Seattle. We had them kind of in a similar bracket. Boston probably a little bit lower, but Boston was coming off that win against Toronto before the break and all that. So questions about where Boston really stacks up and all that. Um, but that also leads to those similar questions about where Miami stacks up against the rest of the competition, because although they were 3-0, they were able to get those wins against some teams that are on the lower end of the standings.
yeah.
And these two losses really just raise more questions about where the squad really fits in, how they're going to perform against, even better teams than the teams they've played so far. But they're in a spot because they were able to win those initial maps where they should be able to be in the winners bracket of Major 1 to kick things off. We'll just have to see how Miami responds to the difficulties of this past week, and it's not going to be easy, especially with their first match on Friday.
Yeah. So we're going to look at standings real quick before we move on to the next matches for next week, just so we kind of have an idea of what kind of is at stake for some of these teams, because there's only 1 weekend left of qualifying matches. And of course, we're on the same kind of format for majors where the top 8 teams begin the tournament in the winners bracket. The bottom 4 teams from the qualifiers will start the tournament in the losers bracket, meaning they only have they don't have any buffer, essentially. They lose and they're out and they go home. So that potentially some of these teams will only play 1 series in Boston and will be flying home pretty dissatisfied with the situation. So currently, according to the CDL, the top 4 teams have already locked in winners bracket spots. That is the Atlanta FaZe, the New York Subliners, Toronto Ultra, and OpTic Texas. Those 4 teams will be in the winners bracket, but seeding still matters quite a bit, considering FaZe and New York are both tied at 5-0 and both have 50 points. Toronto and OpTic are both 4-1 and both have 40 CDL points. And then the remaining 8 teams are still fighting for those last 4 winners bracket spots. At right now, the Miami Heretics and Seattle Surge are tied at 5th place with 30 CDL points. Seattle has played 1 more match than Miami has, so Miami does have the opportunity, if they win out, to secure at least the 5th seed over Seattle. The LA Gorillas and Boston Breach are both at 20 CDL points, tied for 7th place, but Boston has played 1 more match than LAG has so far, so LAG does have the advantage there. And then there are 4 teams right now at the bottom 4. They're all tied for 9th place. So if the season had ended today, or not the season, excuse me, but the qualifying period, if it had ended today, the Minnesota Rocker, Carolina Royal Ravens, Las Vegas Legion, and Los Angeles Thieves, they would all start the tournament in the losers bracket. They all have 10 points, but LAT and Vegas have each played 6 matches, whereas Carolina and Minnesota have only played 5. But the disparity between these teams is pretty stark. Minnesota and Carolina, they are both 1-4, but Minnesota's map win-loss is 8-12, whereas Carolina is 3-14 so far this season. A really, really bad start to the year for the Royal Ravens, and who knows what'll happen. I don't know if they've confirmed if Real will play this week, but really big 2 matches coming up for the Carolina Royal Ravens. Now that we have the standings out of the way, let's get into the actual predictions section of our show. Of course, 3 matches on Friday, 4 matches on Saturday, and then 3 matches to finish it out on Sunday. And then we will finally have the final qualifying seeds for Major 1, and we'll know who's playing who once we get to Boston. So starting on Friday, January 19th, LAG versus Minnesota, a must-win for both of these teams for sure, right? LAG 10 points ahead of Minnesota. Definitely would give them a shot at staying in the hunt for a winner's bracket spot. Minnesota really cannot afford to lose this match. I think they might be able to get out of the bottom 4, but I think it would be really unlikely at that point. So I'm going to go with LAG. I don't feel very confident in either one of these teams, but Minnesota has given me more reasons than LAG at this point in the season to not be confident in them. Do you agree with that?
Yeah, I'm going with LAG too. But before we move on, I do want to give you your flowers. You were heading into the last match on Saturday. You were very close again to a perfect pick'em week, and Miami screwed you and went 10-1 last week. Putting you at 27-5 on the season, while I'm at 21-11. So you're building up quite a lead there, Mr. Preston.
Well, I'm about to get back at Miami for screwing me over for my perfect week because I'm definitely not picking them against OpTic. I'm not going to say that I hope they lose, but I'm not saying I hope they win at this point with them screwing over my perfect pick'em.
I will go with OpTic for much less, or much less. What? I don't even. It's too late for. I'm going OpTic.
Toronto versus New York ends Friday's matches. Matchup of the defending world champions, the world championship runner-ups. Maybe this will be a better result for the Ultra. I'm sure they're hoping. But I'm going to go with the Subliners. They've been more consistent so far. But Toronto, at their best, I think they definitely could beat the Subliners here.
Yeah, I'm hoping this is a 3-2 series. Could go either way, as we even mentioned last year. Toronto did beat New York before the eventual 5-0 slaughter in the grand finals. So I definitely have this one circled, and I can't wait to watch it. But I'm going with New York.
Saturday, January 20th, Toronto. They kick off the day against the Vegas Legion. Gonna go with the Ultra. No surprise there.
Same here.
Miami versus LAG, another very, very interesting match, especially if, either way, if Miami wins or loses against OpTic. But LAG, if they were to win this match, they would be at 3-2, I believe, heading into the final, their final match, or no, final 2 matches of the qualifying period. So this is just a big win or a big match for either one of these teams. I'm going to go with the Gorillas. I'm a big momentum-based guy, especially in Call of Duty. It seems like momentum can kind of swing wildly with these teams, but I'm going to go with the Gorillas over Miami. Not feeling super hot on either one of them, though.
Yeah, I had LAG down, but I'm gonna switch to Miami just so we aren't all chalk across the board with the same picks. But I definitely think LAG's gonna take this one, and I would pick them. But this is another one here where Miami's got to show us what they're capable of, and LAG has shown they're able to hang with some of the big dogs, just not get the win at the end. So looking forward to this one as well. I'll just take Miami for the pick'em.
Next match would be Seattle versus Minnesota. Really not sure what to expect. Obviously, Minnesota is they're either going to be 2-4 or 1-5 heading into this match, and that's not a good place either way. But Seattle has a chance to get to the 4-win mark. I think it would guarantee them a spot in the winner's bracket at that point. So a lot to play for Seattle. Maybe not so much to play for Minnesota if they lose that first match of the weekend. I'm not sure how it'll work out. But I'm going to go Seattle. Not feeling, the Rocker might be the worst team in the league at this point. Carolina is definitely there. But, I'm not feeling confident at all in the Rocker at this point in the season.
Me neither. I'm going Seattle.
And I think we both are in agreement for the last match of Saturday. Atlanta FaZe versus the Carolina Royal Ravens. it would be a shocker if FaZe, who have won all but 3 maps so far, lose to Carolina, who have lost all but 3 maps so far. Maybe that'll change at some point, but I don't think so. I think it'll probably be a 3-0 for Atlanta FaZe.
I'm taking FaZe too.
And then we wrap up on Sunday, January 21st. Carolina, they start the day against LAT. I'll go with Carolina. I have no idea. LAT has, I think maybe the internet will come into play. Maybe the net code will come into play because I think some of the Carolina guys are in Carolina. I don't think all of them are at this point. Who knows if TJ will be playing or if it'll be Real. It's a big caveat, but I think TJ is a serviceable replacement player for Real. I'll go with the Royal Ravens, but whatever. I don't think either one of these teams has proven consistent enough to have any kind of, real faith in them at this point.
Yeah, I agree. I thought you were going to go with LAT, so I was preparing to go with Carolina. I was going to say I'm not really a huge fan of it because we don't even know if Real is playing or if TJ,
Yeah.
not to say, I thought TJ did play well this past week, especially given the circumstances of being a late fill-in. But I'll go with LAT for the sake of the pick'em.
New York versus Boston. Gonna go with the subliners there.
Me too.
And the final match is potentially a banger, but we've seen over the past few years that this has been a pretty one-sided rivalry. But this is a new iteration of this rivalry, right? None of these two rosters have not played each other since they've come together. Obviously, Atlanta versus OpTic. Draza, this is his first match against OpTic as a member of FaZe. And Pred and Kenny, this is their first match against FaZe as members of OpTic. I'll go with OpTic because they have the history of beating FaZe quite a bit, but I'm really interested either way, and this could be a pretty big match in terms of seeding, especially if OpTic does win. That would create some tiebreakers, I would imagine, between some of the top teams in the standings.
Yep, I'm going to go with FaZe. I feel like even through all the ups and downs, and mostly downs between this rivalry over the recent years, I've stuck by FaZe, and it's cost me a little bit, but I'll stick with them here too.
Yep. So that does it for the predictions. Like you were hyping me up, I am 27-5 this season after a 10-1 week 3. So it's been a very good start to the pick'em for me, but you're still doing pretty well. I mean, there's only 6 matches between us, and I mean there are like a lot of matches that we do predictions for. So I could really easily have like a 3-7 week and pretty much blow my entire lead. But right now I'm 27-5. You are 21-11. You went 7-4 last week, which mostly just comes down to Miami, Carolina, and Boston. So the 4 or 3 of the most inconsistent teams at this point, or not really sure what we're getting on a consistent basis with those teams. So we'll see what happens. We don't really have a ton of disagreements across the board this week, but there are quite a few chances, or there are a few chances for you to kind of catch up and make a dent in my lead. But yeah, that does it for the pick'em. I don't think we had anything else. We did talk about the challengers stuff, and we did the pick'em for. We went over our pick'em for last week, and then we went over the pick'em for this week. So I think that about does it. A little bit longer of a show, about 75 minutes or so at this point. But obviously, thank you guys for listening. Thank you guys for watching, wherever you're listening or watching on, whether that is Spotify, Apple Podcasts, YouTube, wherever. We really appreciate you guys, especially as we go further into 2024 and we keep doing these shows. My apologies on the schedule. It's kind of been all over the place. We're still kind of working it out with my new job to try to figure out when the best time is for both of us and the NFL has kind of thrown us for a loop as well, because the Steelers played on Monday instead of Sunday. The Browns played on Saturday, which is just a weird time in general to play. But now we don't have to worry about that because both our teams are out of the playoffs, and I'm officially a Lions fan, at least for the next week. And then if the Lions lose, then I'm a Baker Mayfield fan, I guess, for the Super Bowl, or for the NFC Championship and potentially the Super Bowl. But yeah, that about does it for us. Make sure to follow us on Twitter at JBink with 2Ks, at Pres Byers, podcast Twitter's at Ego Chall Podcast. Next show will be sometime next week. It could be on Saturday, could be on Sunday, could be on Monday, could be on Tuesday. We'll see what happens, but we will be back sometime after it won't be on Saturday because we won't have the CDL matches to talk about, but it could be on some of those other days. And we will be talking about the final week of qualifiers, how those went, and we'll kind of give our preview for Major 1, which is next week, and I think so we will be doing a preview show. We'll kind of breeze through those qualifying matches, so we can give you a good, honest preview, our first major preview of the season, which I always love those because those are a little more free form. We can kind of jump around. We talk about each of the winners bracket matches in kind of somewhat depth, and then we get to kind of give our picks for the championship and who we think will win, who we think will probably get double first rounded, or in the case of those loser bracket teams, just first rounded and have a very disappointing end to the major. But yeah, we will be back sometime early next week to talk about all of that. And I think that does it. Bink, take it away.
Yeah, I'm not going to keep us here any longer because it's almost 1:30 and I am ready for bed. So thank you guys as always for the support. We'll see you whenever we're back. And until then, remember, send the chow.